10:28 Israel Standard Time. 22:28 Israel Standard Time. Daf Yomi, page 20, Amud Beis, Chaf Amud Beis, 20, side 2. With the words Ela, top of the page, with the words Ela b'chad hasra min mechayev. Ela b'chad hasra min mechayev. V'atzanan nazu shoyev shoyev yayin kol hayom. Ein echad v'nechas elachas amgoloi al tishte v'ushose chayev al kol achas v'achas. Lo tzricha תסח 5 אצבעותיו נוסף ואויס וינו ובעשחס להבלה עשרו לכל אחד ואחד. Rather saying that he created 5 bald spots with one forewarning. Is one liable in that case? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah in 21a, a Nazirite who was drinking wine all day is liable to receive only 1 set of lashes if onlookers said to him, do not drink, forewarn him several times, and he drinks after each forewarning, he is liable to receive lashes for each and every drink. The Gemara answers, no, this halacha is necessary only with regard to one who, after one forewarning, smeared his 5 fingers in a depilatory agent, nasha, like nair, and then placed his fingers simultaneously on his hair, thereby creating 5 bald spots, and as in that case, it is tantamount to a forewarning for each and every bald spot that he created. The novel element is that each bald spot is an independent transgression. Rav Huna Omer, Kedei Shira'e Mirosho. Yochanan Omer, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, Kigris. L'tnai, Kama Shiur Karcha, Kigris. V'acher Moimrim, Kedei Shireh Mirosho. How much is the measure of a bald spot for which one is liable? Rav Huna says it must be of sufficient size so that bald skin will be visible on his head. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Shimon, it is the size of a Sicilian bean. The Gemara comments, this unrelated dispute is parallel to a dispute between Tanaim. And how much is the measure of a bald spot? It is the size of a Sicilian bean. Acherim say it must be of sufficient size so that bald skin will be visible on his head. Am Rabbi Yehuda bar Chabiva, Pligi bat Elazar Tanai. Echad omer kegris, v'echad omer kedei shireh merosho. Echad omer kishtei sarois. V'ikadema b'kishtei sarois, u'me'ayel b'chadasha. V'simonech b'heres, gris mechye kadasha. Oh, we have this in this week's parsha. Mamash Tazrim Etzor, right here. B'heres and mechya. Wow. Yehuda bar Chaviva said that there are 3 Tanaim who disagree concerning this matter. One says a spot the size of a Sicilian bean, and one says a spot of sufficient size so that bald skin will be visible on his head. And one says a spot that is a measure of 2 hairs. And there is one who removed the opinion that it is a measure of 2 hairs and inserted an opinion that it is the size of a lentil. And your mnemonic to remember the different opinions is from a Mishnah with regard to the halachot of leprosy. Nagaim 6.5, the measure of impurity for a snow white leprous mark, a baheret, is a Sicilian bean, and the measure of impurity for the raw flesh that grows within the baheret is a lentil. Tana hanoitin melo pi azug b'shabbat chayav v'chama melo pi azug amar Yehuda shtayim v'tanya lekoch shtayim ema lechen koch shtayim. In the related halachim, the sages taught one who removes a scissorful of hair from his head on Shabbat is liable. And how much is a scissorful? Yehuda says 2 hairs. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in Braita for a bald spot the measure is 2 hairs, from which it may be inferred that the measure with regard to labor on Shabbat is different than for a bald spot? The Gemara answers, and the Braita and say, and likewise with regard to a bald spot, the measure is 2 hairs, indicating that the measure for Shabbat and the measure for a bald spot are the same. Tanya Namihachi. That is also taught in the Braita. That supports this idea. Anotu milo piazug b'shamat chai v'chama milo piazug shtayim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer achas u'moed v'chachamim l'Rabbi Eliezer b'malakit l'banos itoch shchos afilu achas shu chayav v'davar ze afilu b'chol asur mishum shene'emar lo yilbash gever simlat yisho. That is also taught in Braita. One who removes a scissorful of hair on Shabbat is liable. And how much is a scissorful? It is 2 hairs. Rabbi Eliezer says 1 hair. And the rabbis concede to Rabbi Eliezer in the case of one who removes white hairs from his back as black ones. Even if he removes 1 hair, that he is liable. Since his intent was to remove that particular hair, its removal constitutes a complete action. The Gemara adds, and for a man, that matter is prohibited even during the week, due to the fact that it is stated, neither shall a man don a woman's garment. Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. Removal of white hairs for the purposes of beautification is characteristic of women, and it is prohibited for a man to perform those actions. V'amakif pas roishoi v'chulu tanu abanon pas hosho sof hosho ve'enu sof hosho ze hamashve tzadia zedav le'achoyer ozne ulpadachto. The Mishnah teaches, and one who rounds the edge of his head is flogged. The sages taught the edge of his head is the extremity of his head. And what is the extremity of his head? This is a reference to one who levels the hairline of his temples to the hairline behind his ear and to the hairline of his forehead. There is no hair behind the ears or on the forehead. One who removes the hair from the temples so that they are like those areas, violates the prohibition against rounding the edges of his beard. Tane kamed Rav Chizda achas amarki achas anika v'loike amarle man dachil tamre be'arba lekai damarlach mani Rabbi Yehuda damar lavshim by ma'ase loikenalo. The Tana taught in a Braise before Chizda, both one who rounds the edges of his head and one for whom the edges of his head are rounded or flogged. Rabbi Chizda said to him, is the one who eats dates that are in a sieve flogged? By analogy, if a person rounded the heads of another's head, why should the person whose head was rounded receive lashes? He performs no action. Rabbi Chizda proceeded to explain the Tana in response to one who says, who is the Tana of the Braita? See, there's Rabbi Yehuda, who says, in the case of a prohibition that does not involve an action, one is flogged for its violation. Rava says, Maskif li'atzmoi v'magnas v'divrei Yaakov Ravashi Omer b'Yisrael v'divrei Yaakov. Rava says that this brisa can be explained as referring to one who rounds the edges for his head for himself, and he is liable both for rounding the edges of his head and for having the edges of his head rounded. And everyone agrees that he is flogged because he performed an action. Ravashi says the brisa can be explained as referring to a case where the one for whom the edges of his head are being rounded assists the person rounding his head by repositioning his head to facilitate that rounding, and everyone agrees that he is flogged. Okay. The Mishnah teaches, and one that mars the edge of his beard is flogged. The sages taught that the edge of his beard is the extremity of his beard. And what is the extremity of his beard? It is the stalk of his beard, meaning the five edges of the beard, enumerated in the Mishnah, where the hair collects in one spot, like grain on stalk. וסוערת יחל אפילו לסוערת על בייסוי שנפל על ספינה סוי שטוב ים תבוד דומר לנפש אינו חייב אלא על המייס בלבד ומנהל למשרס 5 שריטוס על מייס אחד שהוא חייב על כל אחת ויחד Talmud lomar v'seret l'chayvei al kol schita v'schita. The Mishnah teaches, and one who cuts one incision in a display of mourning over the dead is flogged. The sages taught a halach midrash on the verse, and an incision for the soul you shall not place in your flesh. Leviticus 19:28. Had the verse stated only and an incision, one might have thought that this prohibition applies to any incision cut in sorrow, even if he cut an incision in sorrow over his house that collapsed or over his ship that sunk at sea. Therefore, the verse states, for the soul, from which it is derived that he is liable for an incision in mourning only for the dead alone. And from where is it derived that one who cuts 5 incisions in mourning over the dead, the person is liable for each and every incision? The verse states, as an incision to render him liable for each and every incision. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rinailas Lemesaret Srita Ahad al Chamisha Meitim Shahayu Chayav al Kol Achas V'Achas Talmud Lemer Lenefesh Chayav al Kol Nefesh V'Nefesh. Rabbi Yossi says, from where is it derived concerning one who cuts one incision in mourning over 5 dead people, that he is liable for each and every person for whom he cut that interaction. The verse states for the soul to render him liable for each and every dead person. But the Gemara asks, but didn't you already derive from the term from the soul an exemption for one who cut an individual in sorrow over his house that collapsed or over the ship that sunk at the sea? And that's it. That's all she wrote.